Okay, hi everyone. My name is Marion Gamel. I'm a marketeer. I've been in marketing for 20 years, and I've been in digital marketing for 15 years. I worked at Google, joined the company in 2003 when it was a startup, pre-IPO. I launched Google in the UK and Ireland, then in India and surrounding countries, and then in the Middle East and Africa, and then in parts of Eastern Europe. And more recently, I was the VP of Marketing for EMEA for Eventbrite. So today I'm going to speak about something that I've gained experience at, which is global expansion and predominantly the marketing side of global expansion. And I hope that what I'll say you don't already know and that it'll be interesting. So this is what you're going to know within the next 20 minutes that maybe you don't know yet. First of all, growing globally. Are you ready? How do you know if you're ready? What are the 5 steps and I would say about 4 tips for your global expansion to be as fruitful and risk-free as possible? Minimizing the risk, optimizing the opportunity, and then we'll look at marketing, why, when, how much, what sort of marketing, at what point. So let's get started. Global expansion. It's pretty natural for any business to want to grow from being local to being global. And although it's a natural sort of progression, it is also one that comprises quite a lot of risk. You're at risk of losing many things, losing focus on innovation, for instance, because if you have engineers and product people working on localizing a product or creating a special feature for another market, they're not working on the core product. You could also be losing, or at risk of losing your cultural identity, your company culture, because you're going to be dealing with people who are very far away, people from different cultures, and people who maybe you can't even speak to because they're in a different time zone. And also, unfortunately, there's a risk of losing an awful lot of money because we're talking about pretty much starting from scratch in a market where you don't have the awareness and the growth and the know-how of your home country. And there's also an awful lot of logistics involved in global expansion. You know, you've got the likes of local currencies and local differences of doing business, and then recruiting locally and offices and promoting your product to a brand new audience. So I'm generally a very positive and optimistic business person, but I would say always start with the first questions. Am I really ready? Am I making the most already of my home market? Am I growing really well in my home market? Am I in a strong position? Because if you're just about to be eaten up by a competitor in your strong market, maybe it's not the right time to start thinking about global expansion. But hopefully, the next steps that we're going to talk about will help you sort of plan your global expansion in a very safe way. So, the 5 steps. The first one is market prioritization. The reason why I'm talking about this, because this very often lies in the hands of the marketeer. Obviously, you're not going to be launching your service or product or offering in 20 different markets simultaneously. That would be too much work. And when I say that, I need to stress that launching your website locally, such as .it or .es, is not really a launch. That's just like localization or translation. When I'm talking about launch, I'm talking about investment, about having a sales team or a marketing team on site, and so on and so forth. So the goal is to answer those questions. What are the countries that are the most ready for my service? And which one should I go after first, and which one represents the biggest opportunity? So the way we did that, for instance, at Eventbrite, was first to look at internal data and have a look at countries that were already using Eventbrite, even though Eventbrite was only in English to start with. So obviously you had a lot of English-speaking countries like Australia and Canada and England, but also we started seeing peaks of interest in other countries. Now, obviously that tells you that those countries have a demand for what it is that you're offering. Maybe they don't have such offering in their country, or maybe the local players are not very good at all, and maybe you have a technology edge compared to them. Nevertheless, those are countries that I would immediately push up on the priority list thinking, okay, I don't know why yet, but people in these countries are interested in my product. The second thing that I would look at is external data. How big is this market? what is the size of the opportunity? Basically, what you want to know is markets where you're going to have the least friction to enter and markets that have the biggest size and the fastest growth. So at Eventbrite, we created something that we used to call the ripeness model. How ripe is a country and how to prioritize them. So the first thing we would look at after the internal data was external data. So we would look at things, but that's very personal to Eventbrite, things like internet penetration, e-commerce, social commerce, social media, also internet contact from smartphone, that type of thing. Because if those criteria were not filled, then there was no point launching Eventbrite in those markets. Those were the absolute prerequisites. And we would also look at things like GDP. Because if people are starving, they're not going to go and attend events, are they? So things like that, but they're very personal. Another thing that we looked at was density. How many cities above 1 million people were there in this country? Simply because in order to have events, you need a concentration of people in one spot. But again, that's very personal to Eventbrite, and I'm sure you could find the kind of criteria that would make your top 5 list. Then we would analyze this information and sort of forecast. What we would do is look at those particular, let's say, top 10 countries and have a look at how they've been evolving over the past 5 years. And we would compare that to how Eventbrite has been evolving in its home country. So that would be the US, for instance. And that would enable us to forecast how those countries are going to grow compared to our home country. Are they going to grow faster, for instance, which is what we were looking for. And the good news about this exercise is that it's not very time-consuming and it's not very expensive. Most of this data, well, internally, you have access to it. External data, you have a lot of very reliable websites that give you a lot of data on each country. And then you just need a little bit of an analyst time to create a model that enables you to forecast. In a nutshell, if you need to remember one thing, is go for the low-hanging fruits, the biggest, ripest fruits that you can reach easily. And then, you can be more ambitious a little bit later on. Step 2 is plan in depth how you can enter the market. So you've identified your, let's say, top 5 country. It's obvious which top 1 is, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now is not yet the time to invest heavily in marketing or sales team or an office, etc. You have a lot of groundwork to do first to plan. First of all, you have to assess the salient aspects of really fun things like taxation, legalities, local employment laws, things like if you need an office, you need a bank account. If you need a bank account, do you need to create a local entity? All that type of thing you can do way ahead of time, even before setting one foot in the country. And another thing that you need to start working on is localization. And notice that I'm not talking about translation here. I'm talking about localization. So there's a part of translation, which in itself is not a small task, because bad translation is very common. Good translation is a lot of work. But when I'm talking about localization, I'm talking about things that are typical to this market and very different from your home market. I'll give you an example. Eventbrite's an American company. Dates are rather important for events, right? And in America, dates are presented in a different way, right? 10th of March will be 0310. If you show that to a European, he's going to understand that it's the 3rd of October. So that doesn't work. So that needs engineering time to completely change the date system for any country outside of the US, for instance. That's part of localization. Then you have to look into things like social norms in the market. How is business conducted? Are people really into face-to-face interactions? Can you do deals on the phone? Do they need to meet you? Things like that. And you have to decide many things about the way you're going to tackle this market. For instance, do you have to have a local office and employees? Or could you have employees, for instance, in London that fly over once every 2 weeks to do business there? Is it important to have German employees servicing German clients, for instance? By the way, yes, it is. If you have a local presence, what are the taxes like? What are the laws for local entities? Can you keep do you need to create a European local entity to service that market, or do you need an entity in that market? The best way to get answers to these questions are twofold. The first one is to speak to companies that are very similar to you, but they're a bit more advanced. So for Eventbrite, for instance, it was companies like Uber, Etsy, Airbnb. They're about the same age as Eventbrite, great friends, all of those co-founders, they know each other very well, and they were a little bit more advanced in terms of globalization. So I went and asked them all those questions, and they helped me. Another great source of information is, very logically, to reach out to your potential customers in those markets and speak to them. So again, another example from Eventbrite, we very simply organized 5 dinners with local potential users in 5 different German cities, and we asked them everything. What do you expect from a company? What are your criteria to use us? What form of payments are your absolute prerequisites? What would make you shift from the company you currently use to Eventbrite? Those dinners, they're not a huge investment or in time or in money, and they serve a little bit like a focus group, and they give you a lot of very tangible information. Step 3, think about partnerships. So in my time at Google, the early days, it's going to sound funny now, but I didn't have a lot of budget. There was not a huge marketing budget. So I became, by default, the queen of co-marketing partnerships. A very simple and logical explanation to that. When you enter a new market, you're starting from scratch with an audience where you have no brand of awareness, no trust, and basically they're thinking, why should I pay attention to this company? If you partner with a company who has the same kind of audience but is not at all competitive to you, then you could bounce and leverage from the trust that they have with this audience, the existing relationship, and make the most of that and find a beneficiary agreement. So the agreement and the benefit for you is the fact that you suddenly have access to a relevant audience. So I'll give you an example. Eventbrite, for instance, they're in the ticketing and event business. If they partner with the likes of Hiscox, who's the main event insurer in the UK, we share the same kind of audience, event organizers, but we're not competitors, and we can help each other with Hiscox saying, hey, you use us, you trust us, pay attention to Eventbrite. And Eventbrite bringing different things. So what can you bring in that case, in that kind of deal? Well, you can bring a technology edge, for instance. Maybe there's a product, a service that you've invented that's really cool, and that's going to make that partner look a lot shinier and relevant than it is today. You could also bring access to your local audience in your home country. Maybe you're from Italy, and this partner in Germany is actually very interested in coming to Italy. So maybe you can do exactly what he's doing for you in Germany for him in Italy. Or maybe you can bring some added value. For instance, that could be content about a topic that you know very well and that's very relevant to the audience. That could be discounts or vouchers. During my time at Google, I built the whole of AdWords promotion on AdWords vouchers that I would give to webmasters or mobile networks, for instance, telling them, hey, here are, 20,000, 50 euro vouchers. Use them as you please with your new or existing clients as an upsell, as an acquisition method. It doesn't really matter to me, but just use it. That's advertising for AdWords. Doesn't cost me much, certainly doesn't cost me 50 euro per acquisition. And it's a great way to bring added value on the table. Step 4, it's time to act really fast at that point. So let's recap. You've discovered which are your really important sort of priority markets. You've done all your due diligence, your localization, you know how to go into business. You've created your partnerships, they're just waiting for you to give them the green light. And now it's time to act. And I would say act fast and act big. By that, I mean switch on all the marketing campaigns in one go, marketing and PR. So that could be launch campaigns, launch event, PR tour of the founders to get a lot of media coverage, all the partnerships, all the display advertising, online advertising, switch it on big. Then secondly, be bold. Basically send out a message saying, this market is very important to us. We're very serious about it. Not, oh, we're tiptoeing, we're trying, we're not sure it's going to work. No. You're very serious about this market, and that's the message that you're sending out. And then move very fast. And the reason why I'm saying this is because unless your competitors are completely deaf and blind, they would know by now that you're very interested in that market, your local competitors. And they're probably going to start thinking, oh my God, how are we going to react to this? Maybe they're sending out a message in the market saying, you should keep on using local companies. This is an American player. You don't know them. It's better in Germany to use Germans. Some kind of campaign like this that could be detrimental to you. So don't wait another minute once you're ready. And then comes the question, okay, so I need to move fast, but recruiting takes time. Do I recruit people locally? Do I send people from the head office? My quick answer would be send people from the head office, because recruiting someone like a country MD can take up to a year. A marketeer can take 3 to 6 months, and you don't have that kind of luxury at that point. You need to act really fast. So send people from the headquarters. It has a lot of advantages. First of all, they know how to do business your way. They're not going to go and be cowboys and do some weird stuff that's going to, damage your brand or your image. Secondly, they know how to reach out to. So if they have a legal problem, they know your legal counsel. If they have a problem with an invoice being paid or not being paid, they know the finance guy to call. And that will make them a lot more operational rather than brand new people who just send emails and spend 72 hours finding out who they should be talking to. Thirdly, they can recruit on site, face to face, seeing people, and they're going to be the voice of your culture, and they're going to help build your culture, your company culture within that new identity, which is very important and very hard to do for a brand new recruit. Step 5, keep testing and learning. That's true in life, that's true in business. So once you've made the move into the new market, make notes of what you do, what works, what doesn't work. Try different tactics. The purpose is not to be perfect. Be scrappy. It's okay if you fail. You're going to test things. You're not going to spend an awful lot of money, and try as many things as you can. The bonus of that is also that you may find out new tactics that could also be applied in your home country, new things that you didn't think of trying 2, 3, 4 years ago when you first launched. And focus on activities and strategies that are scalable. So you're launching in one city. How can you launch that in 10 cities? You're launching in one country today. How can you use that for 10 countries? If it only works for one market, it's probably not the activity that you should be thinking of. So those were the 5 steps. I will repeat them at the end of this presentation. I just wanted to share with you 4 tips. The first one is use a test market. Having a test market has a lot of advantages. So a test market typically would be a market that is rather small, not very costly, and quite representative of other bigger markets. For instance, at Eventbrite, I chose Ireland. 4 million inhabitants, 1 million in Dublin. With $20,000, I can test something in Dublin. With $20,000, I can't test anything in London or even in Paris. So that was a great testing ground. Furthermore, it's English speaking, which means that I could get help from the US, help from the UK. It was a very sort of low friction kind of test market. So you test everything there. You could test different pricings. You could even test, which we did, the service being free for a period of time to see if that's a good acquisition method. Test different payment methods, see how quickly people get paid or you get paid. Test different formats of partnerships, test different marketing campaigns. And then analyze, refine, and launch bigger. And then you can launch bigger in your bigger markets in UK, Germany, France, Italy, and so on and so forth. Having a testing ground does not make you completely risk-proof, but it certainly really reduces the degree of risk that you're taking. The second tip is build a playbook. What I mean by a playbook is, remember when you were a teenager? Well, maybe not the boys, but the girls, you probably had a diary. Well, go back to that habit and keep a diary of everything that you do in the new market from the minute you start working on that market, because that is going to become your checklist eventually. If you write down everything you do, what works, what doesn't work, take the time to think, okay, why does it work? Can I make it bigger? Why didn't it work? Do I understand what went wrong? Can I test it a little bit differently so that it would work eventually? and keep a track of all that, and that will become your checklist. So that the idea is that it doesn't take 10 times as much effort to launch in the 10 next markets. You've got your checklist, you've got your playbook, and even a new recruit could almost take that playbook, go to that market, and just go, okay, day 1, page 1, page 2, I know exactly what I'm doing and in what order. Tip 3, it's about igniting the power of marketing. So most of you are marketeers or in media, so you know that marketing has gone through a huge transformation over the past 15 years. We've gone from sort of traditional or offline marketing, which was very much about doing a lot of research and then a big media investment and then waiting for a period of time and then a lot of time also to track, awareness, prompted, etc., to eventually 6 months, a year down the line, be able to say that huge campaign worked or it didn't work. Nowadays, marketing is completely different. I can put together, well, not myself, but I can ask someone to help me put together a banner within, 2 hours. I can buy media spend very quickly on a website, test that banner. Is it better vertical? Is it better horizontal? Is it better orange? Is it better blue? I look at my click-through rate. I look at the conversion rate. I look at the cost per acquisition in real time. By the end of the day, I've launched in morning. I'll already know which banners are working the best, which messages are working the best. What this has done is that it's completely turned around marketing from a cost center to a revenue generator. Now, we like that as marketeers because that makes our job a lot safer as well, and also that gives us a place on the board of director. However, many young companies still ask me an awful lot of questions about their marketing needs. What sort of marketing do I need? What sort of marketeer do I need? Are those marketeers relevant now? Are they going to still be enough in 6 months' time to support my growth? What do I outsource? What skills do I build in-house? How do I decide about marketing budget? Is it a percentage of my funding? Is it a percentage of my revenue? Is it just based on my cost per acquisition? Everyone agrees on a cost per acquisition. We want 1 million of that. That's 1 million times that, and that's your marketing budget. Lots of different questions and there's not one answer for all. But there's one thing that every young company goes through, and it's that curve. So basically, technology trigger is you invent your offering. There's a buzz, and then you get a peak of inflated expectation. Then there's a dip through the trough of disillusionment, and then there's a slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. In startup terms, I'm not going to take you through all this, but basically when you're going up, that's when you created your product, you get your funding, you start getting really great coverage from the media, they're very excited about you, and then something happens. Maybe you launch your second product and it's not as good, or the media starts going negative. Like you remember when the press started saying that Google was Big Brother and Google was reading all our emails. That's typically the kind of moment when you tip over and you go through a time of difficulties. That's when you get your second funding, and then things start going a little bit better. You get into more of a cruise situation. So in terms of marketing, what happens in your company? Typically, when you're growing, first of all, you're creating your product, you're focusing on user experience, testing, and SEO. You probably have one marketeer, a young, very bright person who does that. Then you hire your first full-time marketing. He does SEM and he does display. You probably use a PR agency. Then things start going a little bit more challenging. That's when you hire your second marketeer, and you probably take PR in-house because you're thinking, oh my God, what's going on? I need to control the message that's going out there. So let's do PR in-house. Let's start social media and inbound marketing. Then you start things like categorization or vertical marketing, which is basically segmentation. And instead of talking to everyone saying, hey, SMEs, considering that nobody considers themselves as an SME, say rather, different kind of business and talk to them and talk their lingo. Then you probably have about 5 marketing in-house, then 10, then that's when you hire your CMO, because that's when you start needing really marketing strategy and, at board level, you start thinking about globalization, you start thinking about widening your product range, etc. And then international expansion starts and your marketing team grows to 10 or 20. By the way, that's the area during which I help companies, from the moment things start being a little bit challenging, all the way to deciding what sort of CMO is needed when, and help finding that CMO and profiling him. And the last tip before I'm finished is on local hiring. So those employees who you will not speak to on a daily basis, you will not see, those employees who will not be in your corridor hearing about all your news, etc., you have to choose them really well. If you remember how careful you were when you chose your partner, your founder, your co-founder, or your first employees, you're going to have to be just as picky with those employees over there. And that's one of the plus of sending some people from your home country to this new country so that they can do the hiring face-to-face. And last tip is never ever hire anyone you haven't met in person. So just a quick recap, the 5 steps of international growth: you prioritize your market, you plan in depth, then you get ready with partners, then you act really fast and you keep on testing. And tips, you build a playbook, you use a test market, you ignite the power of marketing, and you hire with great care. Thank you very much for your time. Questions? Do we have time for questions? Okay, no questions. All right, well, thank you very much. Oh. I can hear you.
Hi, my name is Alexandra. I'm from Adeludio. I just was wondering if you could talk us through a little bit how you deal exactly with creating great content that's consistent, but through different markets that have different languages specifically.
I think content, you have to become an editor when you're thinking about content. When you're thinking about content marketing, you basically become an editor of a publication. And I think the first thing to do is to understand your audience and what they're interested in. So there are things like focus groups, etc., which are quite pricey and take a bit of time. If you don't have time and you don't have a lot of money, one thing to use is AdWords, because AdWords gives you information about search terms and when they are being searched for. So for instance, in the case of Eventbrite, there's a seasonality to events. People go to festivals during the summer, they go to conferences during September, October, etc. So we could see that seasonality of search terms on Google search, and then we could sort of mirror those points of interest with our blog and say, okay, so people are interested in music, how to survive a music festival around May when they're preparing. That's when we're blogging about that. Thank you. Great, thank you very much.